Welcome to Huddle Up with Matias Bueno. Today, we're taking a trek into the world of footy. Former Canada national goalkeeper, as well as Premier League goalkeeper, and now currently working with Footy Prime, the podcast, alongside Brendan Dunlop and James Sharman, is Craig Forrest. Craig, thanks for joining me on today's episode. I'm super excited to talk some soccer with you.
Yeah, so am I. I'm really excited about it. Thanks for having me on.
So I see that you got a few jerseys there in the background with your name. I see you have a Toronto FC jersey and the one on the right. I'm not sure if that's a very, very retro Canadian. It looks almost like the Rangers blue, but what is that?
Well, that's
one?
right. It's actually the centenary jersey that the national team wore. I don't know how many times, only a couple times in 2012 or something like that. Pretty amazing, because that's what they are. I guess going back to the original, that's basically what they look like. So I didn't even know that until somebody that was watching Footy Prime saw it and said, "Holy heck, where'd you get that?" Like, that's like the holy grail of jerseys and all this kind of stuff. So, yeah. But I changed them. I've got some really nice ones in behind. This is a beauty here too. I think Italian supporters will love the Italian jersey I've got. It's amazing. You know, the Italian jersey is so simple. It's always has been. It's just something very nice about it. The blue's great. Obviously, all their World Cup stars above it look great too. But yeah, so I got a few jerseys lying around.
It would have been something crazy to play against. Have played, at the World. Could you imagine having played against some of those Italy teams from like towards the end of your career? Like they were very good at the beginning and then very good at the end. 94, they made the World Cup final and lost. 98, they lost in the quarters, I think. And then 2002, for the listener, if they may not remember, if they're too young to understand, the one of the craziest scandals in footballing history, the Italy 2002 team that probably should have went on to play, at least in the World Cup final, got robbed on the way by South Korea through the match fixing.
You got a really good, you got a good memory, but you're too young probably to go back.
Oh yeah, I definitely didn't watch that, but I remember when I first started following it, I looked at 2002. I'm like, how did South Korea make the third place playoff? And the scandal against Italy, and then they against Portugal, USA, Poland in the group stage, and then they beat Spain on penalties, and Spain scored a goal that was disallowed. And then even against Germany, despite the fact that Germany could win a game rigged against them, they still had the casualty of Michael Ballack getting suspended for the final. And then some people argue it made a difference against Brazil, but again, Ronaldo was in his heyday, so yeah, he was almost unstoppable. The original Ronaldo. Not Cristiano.
That's right. He's the World Cups, you looking back on some of those, they weren't particularly great World Cups, a lot of them. I think that recently we've seen some really good international tournaments, but some of them defensive. Teams play not to win, they play not to lose. When you're playing group stage, and I get it, because a tournament football is so different than playing league football. And I certainly learned that in my career as well. And doing that is important to know and having the experience. Like, for instance, our Canadian international men's coach, John Herdman, not all the experience in the men's game, primarily the women's game, but he's a football coach and he knows how to deal with people, and he knows and he understands the game so well that it didn't matter about transitioning from from the women's game to the men's game. It was about managing people and knowing the game, and they've dived in, all the players, and fully believe in his systems and beliefs and whatnot. So
yeah, John Herdman, he's also a great character in the world of Canadian football, because he has, like you mentioned, has experience with the women's team, has experience with the men's team, and both teams have done very successfully underneath him. When you consider, when was the last time that Canada was having this run of success at the World Cup qualifiers in your memory, in your lifetime? Like, the last time they made the World Cup was 86, and that was just before you started playing, and they haven't done this well probably since, I don't think.
Yeah, I was I was really unhappy I wasn't playing in that World Cup. I was already in England for 2 years. My coaches, the club, Ipswich at that time in the early 80s, were one of the very best teams in Europe. And they were a very small club, like as far as now, I mean, they're a town but they're a village. And but at that time they were the real deal. And they had contacted the Canadian Soccer Association and said, like, what's going on? Like, I think you're missing out here. And no calls back, nothing. And it wasn't in 87. Interesting enough, I was still only 19, but I played in the under-20 World Cup in Chile for Canada. That was a great experience. And then the 88 year and that summer, I made my debut against Chile and Greece in a tournament in Toronto. And so that was it sort of from that time on. And then we also finished in 1994, second in CONCACAF. We were tied on points going to the last game of the CONCACAF qualifying at home against Mexico, but we needed to win because their goal differential was better. And there was what they called a 1 1/4 spot back then. And the quarter spot was Australia home and away. And if you beat them, then you play Diego Maradona in Argentina home and away. And if you beat them, you were lucky enough to go to the World Cup. Not like now, it's 3.5 teams. It was 1 1/4. And throw that in the fact that CONCACAF was corrupt from top to bottom. FIFA corrupt from top to bottom. Mexico's a massive, probably, well, they're a bigger, well-supported country in the United States than the US are. Let's put it that way. And the World Cup is in the United States. They sell hundreds of thousands of jerseys and on it goes. A German referee came over for that game. Still don't know why. And we wanted to narrow the pitch within the legal limits of FIFA. We showed up for the game. The pitch was wider to give the Mexicans more space to maneuver. So there was a bunch of things around that, but just to think that we took them all the way and in CONCACAF to the last game and finished second in CONCACAF. People don't really realize that. And then 1990 qualifying, Mexico were suspended for that World Cup because they had played some overage players in a tournament. So we were a great opportunity for Canada in 1990 as well, but clubs didn't have to release players then either. So there was many international games that I missed because there was no FIFA rule or a FIFA window. So you just weren't allowed to go. So Ipswich's manager says, I'm not going to let you go. There's a bit of longer story about it than that as well, but that was the case. So we ended up losing on away goals to Guatemala that I didn't play in, and never actually qualified for the actual World Cup proper, which was just a disaster. And then we had that just amazing run in 94, and who knows what happened in that final game. And then, yeah, so we had a really good time. And then obviously winning the North American Championship in 1990 before the Gold Cup against Mexico was amazing. Winning the Gold Cup in 2000 against Colombia, and then beating Mexico and Trinidad, and on and on it goes. It was just, yeah, it was a terrific run. A lot of people, obviously, it's a long time ago. And then from that time on, we have just absolutely sucked. Haven't got to any group stage. And then by the mid 2012, we were playing pre-qualifying against teams like St. Lucia and St. Kitts and all these teams. And I was like, wow, I wish I could have played against those. Those were, tick those clean sheets up. But no, we didn't play against anybody that week. In fact, in all my caps, I played against one team that was ranked outside the top 100 at the time of playing. And that was Panama, believe it or not, which is, I didn't even know they had ever been outside the top 100, but at that time they were. But other than that, never played anybody outside the top 100. So padding the stats like you can do now against all these teams, Dominica, and just on and on it goes. It's just amazing. But also, you see that with the strikers too. I have to sort of, statistics can be a little bit skewed because guys like Dale Mitchell and John Catliff were definitely players that could have played abroad, but the Canadians didn't get a look in as much, and back then, and all their goals were scored against Honduras and Costa Rica and El Salvador and the U.S. and so on, but they never played against St. Lucia, St. Kitts, and Nevis and Martinique and Dominica and Suriname, and on it goes.
I didn't even know that, because I always thought, or I guess the idea in my mind was that they would play against all the teams that are part of the Caribbean, because I remember when the 2007 Gold Cup was on, that they played Guatemala and they crushed them. They also played against St. Vincent, I think, and the Grenadines.
That's right.
And the game seemed a lot easier from the perspective of when you compare to the US or Mexico or Honduras, who made the World Cup. I think it was 2012 or 14, or for the 2014 World Cup, they made it to the Hex, or were going to make it to the Hex, and they played against Honduras and lost 8-0 on the road. And that was just like an extremely shocking loss in terms of the magnitude. And this might have been the one you were talking about before, but I remember somehow I came across when researching how close Canada had come before, I guess, this upcoming tournament, that you guys had lost to Australia in a shootout, or played in a home and away with them, beat them in Edmonton, and lost in Australia. What year was that? I can't remember. Or maybe
that was qualifying for 94. So when we lost the final game against Mexico in Toronto, that our quarter spot was playing Australia, and we ended up losing. Quite amazing. We won. The wind, it was so windy in Edmonton. I think we were 1-0 down at half. It was incredibly windy, coming straight into my face, and really ruined the game from a spectacle standpoint, and disappointing even from a World Cup standpoint, the importance of it. But second half, we battered them, just battered them. We had the wind behind, and we should have won comfortably 3, 4, 5, but we only scored 2. So we won 2-1, and we had to take that to Sydney. So we fly down there in cattle class, taking sleeping pills and being crippled, get off a plane, taking a flight all over the world to get there. And we end up losing 2-1 going into penalties. And then we lost on penalties. But if we had beat them, then Diego Maradona and Argentina were waiting for us.
Oh, geez. Well, I was going to say, because that wasn't Mark Schwarzer would have been the goalie for Australia at the time, right?
That's absolutely right. Yeah. And then he had a great career, mostly for Middlesbrough, but he played a ton in England. He played years and years and years. Yeah.
Because I remember growing up as a kid, and when Australia, they made it in 2006 in the World Cup, and they beat Uruguay on penalties to get there. I remember in the intercontinental playoff. And I just, from playing the video game and like following the tournament, seeing like Mark Schwarzer was a goalie and he played for Middlesbrough. And I'm like, I think Newcastle after, but I could be wrong. And I just remember saying, wow, like that's really amazing, that Australia, like they're a good team, but I guess there's some years where they didn't always make it. Back when you were playing, that was during the very, very famous or infamous, depending on who you talk to, time that Australia was basically forced to transition to the AFC, the Asian Football Confederation, because of their dominance in the OFC and the crazy game of 31-0 against American Samoa. Could you imagine having played in a game like that, or having played in an opponent like that as Canada? Holy.
Well, we almost do when these last round, we get Dominica and countries you wouldn't really be able to spot. But Australia were quite, in fact, not really. I don't think they were too disappointed, because even though they kept winning Oceania, it wasn't an automatic spot. So they wanted to go to Asia, really. I mean, made it harder, but there was automatic spots in so many spots. And then come 2026, I guess we go to 48 teams. So qualifying for Canada and even Australia, all those types of teams are going to be making the World Cup. CONCACAF might have as many as 8 automatic qualifying teams and 2 that would go into a playoff. So it's going to be watered down at the tournament, which kind of worries me. But at the same time, from a growth perspective, when you look at teams like the ones I mentioned that they played, Dominica or Grenada, there's a Canadian coach there at the moment, and he travels around England looking for boys that have backgrounds from Grenada to play internationally. And now all of a sudden, a country like that in a few years could potentially dream of being that 10th spot, getting a playoff, or 8th spot, or, so it changes the dynamics and the belief in all those islands to the Caribbean and even Central America that will now have a real opportunity, and we'll put some resources into it, and the development of the game will benefit, I think, long-term from it.
That is an interesting debate that I've talked about with some friends and family about, well, is it just a money grab? They're just trying to give these little teams hope, and there's no way they could beat a big team in the World Cup. But at the same time, if you look at what's going on in the AFCON right now, the other day, Comoros took it to Cameroon with a left back in goal. Now, as someone who used to play goalie, you can understand how difficult the position is, let alone a country like Comoros that most people have never even heard of before. And under 1 million people, like that to me is, and there were 10 down to 10 men. That's so insane to me.
Yeah. I saw that, and it was an amazing thing, because the goalkeeper, I think, had COVID, didn't he?
Yeah, all three of them did. Yeah, they're all out.
They were down to bare bones. I think they had 12 players, and so incredible. But the reason why they are successful, majority, I think 99% of the players are French born. They're coming through the French system, again, with backgrounds from that country, and somebody's got their head together and invested or put some money involved into it and said, hey, listen, let's try to do something here. Most of those boys probably never even have been there before, but their background, they weren't playing for France, but so they play, and it's been fantastic. We have that situation in CONCACAF as well, with teams like Martinique or Suriname, or there's another one too.
Guadeloupe, I think, has
Guadeloupe. That's right. The French players that come over, and they're they might be second division French player level, but they're no pushovers, and on their day they can surprise, and that's great to see. And that point was actually made to me as well, about talking about the competitive levels of these smaller countries by Victor Montaliani, who's the president of CONCACAF, who said that, despite all these lower teams rankings playing against the top ones in the Nations League, which is another good opportunity for these smaller countries to play more games. Don't get me wrong, it is a cash grab. It's there's both here, but from the development of the game, I think it's definitely a good thing. But yeah, from a perspective of more money for FIFA, absolutely. I mean, when they talk about having a World Cup every 2 years, I mean, there you go. It takes away something special about, happening only a couple times in some people's careers. It's just a special thing, and going every 2 years, I don't think there's room for it. And with all the other continental tournaments that are important to people as well, and league football, there's just too much going on.
I know that players who have been a part of countries with different generations or different circumstances, like yourself playing with Canada, the circumstances for Canada to succeed back then were far more difficult than they are now. When you look back at some of those teams you're part of, do you think that they would have been able to have had more success than some of the teams that Canada has put forth since your time, since you were done playing? Or do you think it was pretty on par with how the teams have been until more recently?
Oh, no. I mean, I was looking at that about, just looking at what happened is incredible, because I was calling games for all those years. They were terrible. And the Gold Cups, they were getting smashed. World Cup qualifying, just horrendous. Weren't even making the final group stage. And, I was listening to Julian de Guzman, who did TSN did this really nice piece about winning and trying to win in Central America. And I looked, and that the whole time that he actually played, I don't think they ever won a game in Central America. I'm like, no wonder it's such a freaking big deal. They never won. So, yeah, we had to battle through some adversity down there to get results from Honduras and Costa Rica and US. Mexico is the only place I never got a result in there. That was tough.
Yeah, they're one of those interesting North American teams, because if you look at the span of their history in terms of all World Cups since 1930, they're the strongest team out of North America, head and shoulders, and it would take probably 3 or 4 tournaments before the United States could catch up to their record. But in the same breath, Mexico have never made it past the quarterfinals. And that to me is a bit of a shock, because when you look at the success, even in Africa, like the whole Suarez red card, blah, 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 like that was super upsetting because that basically would have guaranteed Ghana's place in the semifinal, being the first African nation to achieve that. So you look and see there is talent, tons and tons of talent in a continent like Africa. Maybe not as much, but still a very strong pool of talent in North America. But teams seem to not be able to get over the hump, or at least not yet. But I'm not sure how we'll see if that changes in heading into Qatar and also into the Canada,
Yeah,
Mexico,
I think
US trio.
we'll see it. I think that jump from the African countries is sort of, I think they anticipated that they'd want to been more successful to this point. And Mexico, you're right. I mean, it is as popular and as massive and as, and like a religion there as it is in Brazil. And I'm not sure why internationally they haven't been able to get over that hump. They've been very successful at the Olympic level, under 23s, unfortunately for men, but they play a couple over age players. And then they did well. They've won the under 17 World Cup, a youth level. So that generation was coming through, and you just figured it's time for them for, actually go all the way and win the World Cup. You have to be somewhat lucky as well, I suppose, but it is surprising. And maybe qualifying is too easy for them generally. They probably have it the easiest out of anywhere in the world to qualify. And yeah, I mean, anytime when you look at CONCACAF championships that go even beyond the Gold Cup, they handed out their World Cup qualifying tournaments, basically. Like Haiti's won it before, Honduras has won it before, but they've won it when the tournaments was held in Honduras, when it was held in Haiti. Canada won in 86, but it's kind of hard to claim it when it'd be like Canada winning or Mexico winning the North American Hockey Championship without Canada in it.
Yeah, exactly.
Mexico didn't play in 85 because they had the automatic spot in 86. So they absolutely have dominated. The US have done well in recent years and certainly are doing what they can to catch up. And I think that they would have hoped to have done more as well internationally, I think success-wise with what they've invested in the game, but they're getting there.
And they'll get there eventually. And the more the players, you look at Team Canada now, how many guys are playing in Europe with, one of a Canada player right now signing in Porto, like that's ginormous for the development of the country. And how many guys back in the day when you were playing on the team were playing in Europe, because you were playing with Ipswich and also played for, I think it was it West Ham or Aston Villa? The
West
last
Ham.
West Ham.
5 years at West Ham. Yeah. There was a few, Frank Yallop, it was actually at Ipswich. And back, it was interesting because I tried to get him to play for Canada beforehand because his parents, and he lived there for 5 years when he was 7 to 12 before going back to Ipswich at their youth level. But he had played for England youth when he was 14, 15. And back then that tied you to the country. That was it. You couldn't play for any other country. And then Sir Bobby Robson was Frank's coach, and he had just left and he was, I think, with the England setup at the time, he was. And we contacted Bobby Robson and asked if there's anything he could do. He contacted and helped with the process of basically saying, listen, we're England, I'm the England manager. We'll sign this player off. I know this isn't how the rules work, but we'll sign him off. And for whatever reason, they said, yeah, okay, well. And then, so he missed a few years that he could have played for Canada. So he was Premier League level. And then you had Ian Bridge, who was playing in Switzerland. Mentioned a few lads that were playing in Scotland. DeVos was playing lower levels in England and Scotland. And so there's a few guys, but most of them are lower level. Now you look at it, you got Alphonso Davies, which is just the fantastic story. And I never thought I'd see a Canadian player at his level, because he is on a different planet as far as level goes. We're talking about best 11 in the world, like right now, for my money. And for him to, when he went to Bayern, I thought the price tag was about right. A lot of teams were interested, but they weren't willing to invest because they weren't sure if they was going to turn out to be what they wanted to be. He hit the ground running in Germany, and he hasn't looked back. And ends up winning, I don't know how many trophies before he was 20 years old. And it's just incredible. And so you got a tier 1 player there. And then you got Jonathan David, top goal scorer, winning the league in France for not PSG, but for Lille. And you got other players, even Milan Bojan is not playing in the best league in the world, that's for sure, in Serbia. I mean, the Red Star Belgrade back in the day in the Yugoslavian league was massive, amazing, but it's not the greatest league for sure, but they're winning. So you have a bunch of players that are used to winning all the time. And then the boy in Glasgow Rangers as well, who just recently retired internationally, Scott Arfield. So we had a bunch of guys winning actual league titles, and some of them massive. France, Germany. I mean, those are big titles in the biggest league. So we've never had that before, and we've never had the pace up front to scare teams, to turn teams around. Like, I never seen Mexico play at Azteca against any Canadian team and actually sit back, because they were so worried about Alfonso and even Tejan Buchanan and the pace of David. It just terrified them, which was great to see.
That to me was one of the most shocking results when you consider in the context of Canada's track record in Mexico. It's not a surprise when you look at how well the team has been doing and how good the team is right now. Mm-hmm. But growing up as a kid, if you would have told me, in about 10 years or so, or maybe 15 years, Canada will be able to will drop points out of the Azteca, like, that's impossible. There's no way. Like, I remember as a kid seeing Canada play against Brazil in like a friendly tournament and tie, and that seemed like the craziest thing in the entire world. But
that's right.
They're no joke anymore. And with the tournament expanding, it only seems inevitable that Canada will start to be a regular on the international stage.
Yeah, I absolutely believe in that. Well, we're going to get a spot in 2026, so we're good there. And then it expands when we're to 48 teams anyway. So like I said, we might have 8 automatic. And if you don't qualify 8 automatic and maybe 2 playoff spots, you really won't be deserving to go to any World Cup anyway, right? So things look bright for us. And I think it's great as well. The whole perception has changed. Like we're doing an interview talking to Paul Stalteri today about that, and then how hard it was to get a trial. Like, he had to phone and get a hold of so many clubs before Werder Bremen decided, we'll give you a 2-week trial if you pay your way over. And he said that 2-week trial was basically day to day. He said if you did poorly the first day, they would just say, all right, you're gone. But if you do well, you're assured day to day. And then he signed, and he spent some time in the reserves, and then ends up, going all the way. But he said a lot of that was all perception. If I was at the same level as a Brazilian or an Argentinian or whatever, or from a traditional soccer country, if you like, I would have been signed, no problem. They would have paid my way to come over. But that's how different it was back then. And I was fortunate in a way, at Ipswich, because even though they're a backwoods small village town in east of England, with Bobby Robson bringing in foreign players, probably the first manager in England to bring in foreign players at the level that he did, Frans Thijssen, Arnold Muren of the Dutch national system. When they came over, people were like, no way they can play in that league. They're going to get the living crap kicked out of them. When you see even Diego Maradona clips, back in the day, everybody tried to break his leg every time he went by. It was just a totally different game. And they were able to play. And did they ever play? And they proved that, okay, foreigners can come in. And I'm talking about just continental foreigners, not Canadians or anything like that. We're just talking about Dutchmen and Italians and stuff like that. They're like, they couldn't be able to, they weren't physical enough. The Brits were, very stuck up about that and had a real, sort of ignorance about international players. And so it was tough, but because they had that history of foreign players doing well, and even having Frank Yellup, English born, but had lived in Canada for a while, they were open-minded. And that's really what helped me getting in the door to have a look. But they still didn't sign me for a month.
When you played in England, I remember listening to some episodes of Footy Prime and how, adjusting to the culture and what that's like, especially because Ipswich now is a team that usually is like championship or League One, and to see Ipswich in the like, it's been a long time since Ipswich has been in the Prem, but I remember particularly listening to a story where you're talking about having to make tea for everyone on the team, and you're having to like be tasked with things that are just regular common practice, but here you are, some guy from Canada, like, okay, I need to figure out what I'm doing here. What was that instance like? And was it a microcosm for the overall experience of being that one of the very few foreign players playing on an English team back in the day when it wasn't that really common?
Yeah, I think you're talking about it's coming through the youth system, right? And then
Yeah.
doing jobs. Yeah, it was like we were like cheap labor. We were investments, but we were also cheap labor because we would clean the stands. We would all have jobs, or we would be, 1 week you'd be cleaning toilets, or then you'd be doing boots or bathtubs or showers or odds and ends jobs where there was no cleaning people. They were the youth players. And even though there was times at that age when I was 16, 17, that I absolutely hated it, that part of it, I think it sort of put you in your place a little bit, and sort of, you had to pay your dues in more ways than one. And it gave you a little bit of discipline. And I think that discipline is good for especially the players that don't make it. And the mass majority of the youth players don't. We had a really successful youth team. We won a European tournament in France with Barcelona, Inter Milan, and who else was there? Santiago de Chile, Nakata from Mexico, Porto, Benfica, and we won it. And there's only a couple players went on to have decent long careers, and that was Dalian Atkinson, who passed away recently. That's another story altogether, by being tasered by some policemen in Birmingham, and Jason Dezell, who went on to play for Spurs as well. So it was, that was an eye opener for me to think that, wow, how good we were as a youth team. We dominated, and there's only a couple of guys. The rest of them got let go and released. So it's a tough transitioning from that to real life if you don't have any discipline. So it gave us that, at least, but they don't do that anymore.
Yeah, the way that things have changed it's drastic almost to think about back to your playing days versus now. And even with how the Premier League is and who some of the players are, like the Premier League is probably the league with the most parity now of any of the major four, like La Liga, Bundesliga, Serie A are all top heavy. And then the Premier League, anybody can win. Like Man City's good one year, Liverpool's good the other year, Man U's good another year, Chelsea's good. We were talking even before recording, Chelsea were bad in the 80s, and now, and even just around the time that you were there and then afterwards, Abramovich came in and boom. Like I remember as a kid when Zabarini was there as a coach, and after the Hernan Crespo days, like the Premier League has changed so much. It's crazy.
Yeah. I mean, when I started in the Premier League, I mean, everybody on the team would be British Isles. I don't think we had any foreigners. And we ended up having Adrian Paz from Uruguay, striker, signed for us. Not Paulo Wanchop. Well, Paulo Wanchop was Costa Rican. He came to West Ham. Who else did we have? We had Boncho Genshev, a Bulgarian international striker as well. So sort of started coming in a little bit. And then my last game that I ever played in the Premier League, I think there was, with the bench players and the starting lineup, I think there was 17 or 18 different nationalities in that my last game. So it was, even when I was on loan in Chelsea in '97, we virtually fielded an all foreign team. There was only a couple. There was Jody Morrison was English, and then there was another Scotsman that his name slips my mind. Other than that, we're completely foreign. French. We had Bulgarians, we had Romanians, we had Italians with Zola and Vialli and Ruud Gullit. The Dutchman was a the manager. Yeah, it was changing. It was changing. Yeah, quickly. And that was probably the best part about it. And playing at West Ham was playing with all these different nationalities and people from all around the world, and experiencing just chatting to them about football and life and the way they were brought up. And it's just a completely different world when you look at you know, where we're living in Canada and the sort of the hockey culture where that doesn't happen. I mean, it's wealthy white people playing and they don't get the opportunity for that type of experience. And that was the best thing. I mean, I played with, and then every religion played with Ayo Berkovich, who was Israeli, and we're playing with Muslims at the same time, with Freddie Canute, Catholics, Protestants, and all the Northern Ireland crap, all those types of things. It is really interesting. The Scottish English, battle between, still lingers on. And if we ever had training sessions in five-a-sides and they played North against South, I was a Canadian, so I just fill in wherever they needed a goalkeeper, right? I couldn't believe it. Like, you're starting a war in training. I mean, it's incredible. I mean, I don't know if you ever saw in my West Ham days, there was a leaked video of Ayo Berkovich, the Israeli player, and John Hartson, the Welsh international, big John Hartson. And in our training session, he boots Ayo Berkovich in the head, and it. I remember looking over to the camera, and the guy was definitely filming it. Harry Redknapp walked down the sideline to the camera, and the guy said, "Don't worry, it's gone. It won't see the light of day." But he didn't make him erase it. He wouldn't know how to do that anyway, Harry. And it didn't come out for 2 weeks. And one day I was come home from training. I'm sitting there at home, and I'm like, OMG. They teased this news thing coming out, and it's just the boot of John Hartson booting Ayo Berkovich, right? Oh, geez. Well, holy shit, the shit hit the fan then. And, we had solved that internally as far as the two guys go and the club and everything else, but it leaked out. And it was, the training sessions were often nasty, very competitive. And if you threw in the North v South thing, that would just, as a coach, you didn't even have to, try to get everybody, warmed up and into the training session. If you just North South, and then you just create a war.
You talk about the comparison of hockey versus soccer, and with how diverse teams can be compared to hockey. It's more than night and day. Would you argue, because people talk about how vicious hockey can be, but would you argue that the culture still to this day, maybe in soccer, in terms of competitiveness and nastiness, for potential for nastiness, is greater than that of hockey? Or would you say that hockey is definitely more vicious now when it comes to, the chirping and the chippiness back and forth?
Well, hockey's not like it used to be. It used to be vicious. They've created a much better environment for skill and for smaller players in the National Hockey League. To make the product much better. Almost the biggest problem with it now is that the speed of the game. Back in the day, you just hook on to people, and it was never a foul. They'd just ride you, and you could be, and if you weren't strong enough to hold those hooks and things like that, you couldn't handle it. They had those big, huge centers standing in front of the net, taking an absolute beating. You can't do that. You might get one cross check. And I know I talked to a guy like Corey Cross, who played in the NHL for Pittsburgh and Toronto Maple Leafs, and he's coaching, I think, in Kelowna, or he was. And he just says it's just a totally different generation of players. We said one game, our best player was they took a hold of him and we're just starting to feed him, punch him in. And usually, back in the day, that would obviously trigger you to go after their guy. I mean, it was just, it would be an absolute war on the ice. But it's not like that anymore, as much anymore. Not to say the hitting isn't, it's physical. But when hockey fans will talk about soccer players and their actual character as being babies and crybabies and cheaters and all that kind of stuff, that's where their ignorance jumps in, because I will take one of those. I'll take Luis Suarez in a backstreet fight against any NHL player. These guys are tough as they get. They've grown up in the poorest fucking areas in the world, and they're tough, but they also will do anything. There's no shame. to win. We've seen most ridiculous things from players. We talk about the '02 World Cup, Rivaldo. Remember that ball hit him in the
Yeah,
knee and he
against
grabbed his,
Turkey. Yeah,
like just no shame at all. But you have to, you have to appreciate where they come from. They've had nothing given to them, nothing. And they're also not only producing and making money and living for themselves, they're also supporting communities sometimes back home. There's a lot of pressure on them from that standpoint. And people don't really understand it. From a toughness standpoint, you can't talk to me about toughness. And these guys didn't even have food on the plate,
Yeah, that is one thing. And I know we are getting towards the end of our time, but like that is one thing I just absolutely have tried to echo, but people don't believe me. They say, oh man, well, they just fall over and they're crybabies and they do whatever they want. I'm like, listen, as someone who's refereed soccer for 10 years, it has to do with what you just said. They have no shame. They'll do whatever it takes to win. They will trick the ref. They'll make it as hard as possible for them to differentiate what's a foul and what's not. Because when you got guys like you just mentioned, boot in the head and they're super physical.
Yeah.
The players know the fine lines. Okay, if I throw myself when he swings, the ref is always ready for physicality. So he's not going to be able to tell at times from certain angles, was this a foul or was this a dive, right? You see Arjen Robben diving against Chile, like people are livid. You see Rivaldo again in 2002, Suarez with the handball against Ghana. Like the list goes on, but you ever been Charlie horse? You ever had guys go at you in training? I mean, the behind the scenes. That's far crazier than you're all geared up in Michelin man pads and then they allow for the occasional fist fight. But like where these guys came from,
the fighting was a sideshow. Everybody had a goon and they didn't play much and they get tapped on the shoulder and go out there and fight. And really, when you look at the interviews of all or most of the fighters, I haven't heard one of those guys say they liked it. Like they wanted to play in the NHL. They want to play, but they were playing. They were getting tapped on the Gino Ojic in Vancouver, called him Big Chief, big native guy. They tap him on the shoulder and go out there and beat the living crap out of somebody, and then they would just tap each other on the shoulder and good fight, good show. But can you imagine in any other sport you might as well put a spotlight on two guys just going toe to toe, and they actually think that has any relevance to the game? The meatheads will say, "Oh, bring gets the guys going." Well, there's other ways to get the guys going, and fortunately, we don't see as much as that. I mean, especially now in the playoffs, you won't see a fight. It's great. I think the game is improved for it, but it's definitely different. And but from a toughness standpoint, I'm not taking anything away. Canadian boys are tough, no question. But I'll take a guy from the Provellas any day.
Yeah, that's the funny. It's funny you mention the favelas. Like people think, oh yeah, man, I grew up in whatever Scarborough for people from Toronto or Winnipeg or North Point, Douglas, these tough areas in Canada. It's like, man, like you have someone that grew up in the favelas in Brazil, they will wipe the streets with any person from any poor neighborhood in Canada, bar none, no questions.
Yeah. And they might go, well, maybe they'll probably cheat. And it was like, yeah. You might get a knife in the belly. They're not going to fight fair. What are you talking about here? You know what I mean?
If anyone's ever seen the movie Cidade de Deus or City of God in English, like that's a great introduction to the potential of what can happen if you screw around with people from the wrong neighborhoods in South America. Like it is a jungle figuratively and also literally. Like
it really is. I mean, it's sad. It's absolutely sad. And there's a lot of reasons why Central America is like that. And a lot of them are bad reasons, but they've given them no chance not to get out of these opportunities to be part of gangs, because there's no opportunities otherwise. And at least a gang gives you some sort of, part of a group, and, even if it's bad, but you're pretty hard in places like Tegucigalpa in Honduras or, San Pedro Sula that have the nastiest of the nastiest gangs. And when somebody in Canada says after the Honduran game to me, they're like, how they should be embarrassed the way they go down diving around. I'm like, do you think for a second that somebody in Honduras, the murder fucking capital of the world, gives a flying shit about what a Canadian thinks about how they're playing? and whether they're making themselves embarrassed or not. Like that's what people don't understand. It drives me crazy, and I'm sure it does you too, because you're obviously very well educated on this stuff.
Yeah, it is absolutely bonkers. And I employ anyone, go play soccer in another country and then come back and then you can compare and contrast. Don't sit there and be like, oh, I played in Canada, within the heart of the city of Toronto. Like, go play soccer on the streets of Montevideo or Rio de Janeiro, and then you can compare and contrast.
Yeah.
More fairly.
Well, it's interesting that too, because I even know some of, talking to some CPL coaches and saying that some of the, players in the Canadian Premier League that haven't left the country, they're playing at that level, and it's hard to get to them because they're actually think there's somebody, and they are, because they're the best player from their local area, and they probably grew up the B's and E's and top this, and oh, he's known by so-and-so in Scarborough or some part of Toronto. Do you think somebody in Madrid gives a shit about this kid in some part of Toronto who doesn't even know, you know what I mean? Like,
yeah,
like guys like that. And then this is where the difference between a guy like Alfonso or Jonathan David said right from the get-go when he was a young boy, like, I'm not playing MLS. I'm going to Europe. Now that's fine. No disrespect to MLS. It's been an unbelievable tool for people, and it's a great league for us. But he's like, no, I'm going there. He was because he's driven. So it takes the ability as well as the character and the desire to stay the course that make the difference between those players. And I've seen some players that showed all the ability in the world, and they've never been able to quite make that, or once they get in front of a crowd or you put some pressure on them and they just wilt. So it's hard to know sometimes until you get to that level. But that's really what makes the difference between the player like I just talked about that thinks he's great in Toronto, but nobody knows about him, but a guy that wants to drive himself to be the very, very best.
Yeah, it makes a huge difference. And Canada is a country that's continuing to gain a more respectable reputation in soccer, but it takes a long time to establish yourself as a serious team. And even there's a lot of people out there from other countries that don't respect the US, and the US has not missed the World Cup, or sorry, they missed once in 2018 since 94. So, and that's how many years in a row, and people still don't respect them in a lot of places. So for Canada, it's going to take multiple generations before they're seen as an established football nation across the world. But all we can do is just continue to support the growth of the game in the country, because that's all that is necessary for Canada to continue to rise on this trajectory that they've been skyrocketing on in the last few years.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that's great that they've been doing that. And the fact that it's always been the World Cup isn't the best 32, countries in the world. Everybody knows that. There'll be countries from Asia and Africa and the European countries that we're going to see this World Cup without either Portugal or Italy. One of those countries is going out, and there's going to be countries in there that couldn't, lace the boots of either one of them. You know what I mean? So it's never been about sort of the best 32. It's been about sort of encompassing the whole World Cup and creating that. But if they were going to have the best 32, we know where they would come from. It'd be mostly Europe and South America, and then you throw in the odd other country from here and there that would slip in. So that's just how it goes. That's where the Americans have sort of let themselves down. So they're seen as a team that qualifies in a very easy area of the world.
Well, Craig, we have reached the end of our time on today's episode. So I want to thank you for having joined me. It was a great pleasure to talk footy with you, as well as share some stories from your career and just really get a great perspective on, how great the game really is, and also how tough it can be for those that come from North America, especially Canada, to really branch themselves out and establish themselves as serious footballers in Europe and in other places of the world.
Well, thanks for having me. I really appreciate it. I had a really good time.
And thank you to the listener for enjoying today's episode with former Canadian national team goalkeeper, as well as one of the hosts of Footy Prime, the podcast, Craig Forrest.